My wife stays up every night contacting people to like and boost the reputation of a scandal-ridden celebrity. When I urged her to be rational, she snapped back. No one can compare to my idol. What do you know? Because our crying son disturbed her voting campaign. She even nearly strangled the child to death. We can have another baby, but this voting event is crucial for my idol. Fine, since that's how it is, let her live with her online scandalous idol then. At 3 a.m., my wife Linyu stared at her phone screen with bloodshot eyes. Her fingers frantically tapping the screen while muttering incantations. My precious idol, I must get you to the top of the hot search list this time. Her shrill, hysterical voice abruptly woke our son in the crib. The 6-month-old infant instantly bursting into wails. I rushed to the crib in 3 swift steps. Carefully lifting my son, I gently patted his back, trying to soothe him. Meanwhile, my eyes urgently darted around the room searching for the bottle, intending to make some formula to calm him. Lin Yu's eyebrows twisted into a knot as she glared fiercely at our son, her gaze almost murderous. Stop crying. So annoying. Don't you dare interrupt my idol voting. The baby's slightly subsided wails instantly escalated into piercing screams at Lin Yu's roar. Lin Yu, I raised my voice, struggling to suppress my anger. Can't you be rational? At my words, Lin Yu exploded like a lit powder keg, springing up from the bed in a frenzied state. Rational? I'm supporting my idol, boosting his popularity. You'd never understand. Her voice neared a scream, cheeks flushed with an unnatural redness from agitation. The son was trembling with fear, his cries growing increasingly desperate. Lin Yu showed no restraint, instead planting her hands on her hips and glaring at me with an almost accusatory gaze. Having spent days and nights obsessively voting for her so-called idol in rankings, her eyes were bloodshot. Her face unnervingly pale, resembling a character straight out of a horror movie. Exhausted both physically and mentally from working overtime daily to meet project deadlines this past month. All my pent-up frustration and pressure now burst forth like a collapsing dam. What idol? I roared furiously. He's a disgraced celebrity. Wake up. Lin Yu spiraled further out of control, even attempting to charge at me to argue. I sidestepped to block her, shielding our son behind me. Stop this now. He's drinking his formula. Can we discuss this later? Lin Yu continued glaring at me with undiminished rage, plopping onto the sofa before launching into relentless complaints. Our son seemed to sense the tense standoff between us and ate more hurriedly. His tiny hands clutched the milk bottle tightly, choking after just a few gulps. I hurriedly turned to pick up my son, patting his back repeatedly with my other hand. When it rains, it pours. The doorbell rang an urgent, rapid ding-dong-s, accompanied by shouts from the neighbor downstairs. What's going on up there at this hour? Keep it down. Have you no consideration for others trying to sleep? As our son continued coughing in discomfort, the voices from the downstairs neighbor grew increasingly impatient. Lin Yu remained seated on the sofa, her face twisted in disdain, showing no intention to help. With no other choice, I carefully settled our son and moved toward the door. Lin Yu, look after our son first. I'll handle the door. Without waiting for her response, I slipped on my shoes and opened the door. Outside stood the downstairs neighbor, face flushed with anger. What are you doing up so late at night making all this racket? I quickly nodded repeatedly in apology. I'm truly sorry, it's entirely our fault. Tomorrow I'll make sure to come down specially to apologize properly. I'm really so sorry. Seeing my sincere attitude, the neighbor's expression softened slightly. But before he could speak, sudden heart-wrenching sobs came from our son in the room, followed by Lin Yu's nearly insane roar. I immediately turned and dashed back into the room. I saw milk stains all over my son's face, his little face flushed crimson. Lin Yu's hands were tightly gripping our son's arms, madness gleaming in her eyes. Can't even nurse properly? Making me miss my idol's live stream likes. Lin Yu, I shouted in terror, instantly rushing to the sofa. Shoving Lin Yu away with force, I scooped my son into my arms and gently rubbed his chest. The baby's cries gradually weakened. His entire face flushed a deep purplish red from brief oxygen deprivation. I looked at my son with aching heartache, shouting at Lin Yu through gritted teeth. Have you lost your mind? A neighbor from downstairs followed in. After witnessing the scene and glancing at Lin Yu, they immediately grasped the situation. During this period, Lin Yu had been staying up late every night glued to her phone, obsessively liking posts for her idol's voting campaigns while arguing fiercely with other commenters. The entire building had been disturbed by the noise. The neighbor gazed at me with pity. Lao Zhang, you really should consider separating. If this continues, life will become unbearable. Lin Yu flew into a rage upon hearing this, shrieking at the top of her lungs. How dare you meddle? This is our family matter. The neighbor hurriedly left in fear. When Lin Yu tried to chase after them to argue, I grabbed her arm forcefully. I'm taking our son to the hospital now. You stay put at home. Anxiety gripping my heart, I rushed to the hospital clutching my son. Throughout the journey, my heart pounded in my throat. My eyes glued to my son's flushed little face, my feet never daring to pause even for a moment. At the hospital, I collapsed onto a corridor bench, all strength drained from my body. Lin Yu and I shared a bond forged since childhood. She'd been obsessed with celebrity worship since her youth. When we got married, my mother had expressed quiet concerns. Back then, I simply thought star chasing was just her personal hobby, something to be respected, deserving of freedom and space. Who could have predicted her obsession would spiral into madness? Even at 9 months pregnant, on the verge of labor, she still wanted to teeter on stiletto heels wearing fancy dresses to greet her idol at the airport. I had to plead with her outside the airport to stop her. But all I got in return was a torrent of abuse from her, accusing me of sabotaging the beautiful connection between her and her idol. But this time, her behavior completely surpassed my wildest imagination. As I was stewing over these frustrations, a nurse emerged from the examination room and called out loudly, "Who's the parent of Zhang Zixuan?" "Zhang Zixuan, that's my son's name." I immediately stood up and hurried forward, eagerly responding, "That's me. I am. Thank heavens, there's nothing seriously wrong with my son." However, out of caution, the doctor still advised us to return tomorrow afternoon for a follow-up checkup. Thinking of Lin Yu's utterly deranged state at home, I saw no other option, and had to trouble my sister to temporarily take care of my son at her place. By the time I got home, it was almost 7 p.m., and I still needed to rush to work. Lin Yu was curled up on the sofa, energetically doing data tasks for her so-called brother. Her fingers flew across the phone screen while she chattered away on the phone with her online fan sisters, shouting loudly, "Those haters online are just jealous of our brother. They say we're brainless? They're the real stupid and wicked ones." I rubbed my throbbing temples, my heart filled with irritation. Lin Yu turned to glance at me, her gaze sweeping over me briefly before saying, "You're back? I'm hungry. Hurry up and make me something to eat. That little brat kept me awake all night yesterday." I couldn't help retorting, "What little brat?" "That's your son." Lin Yu acted as if she hadn't heard, merely uttering an emotionless, "Oh," before diving back into her heated conversation with the fan group, without even asking how her son was doing, as if she hadn't been the one who'd pinched the child earlier. Lin Yu hadn't worked a single day since we got married. I sometimes advised her to find a job, but she would immediately retort, "It's natural for men to support women. Why did you marry me if you won't provide for me?" After getting pregnant, she became even more reclusive, either voting for her idol on fan charts or busy posting his online stats. Her only outings were to greet her idol at airports during tours, sometimes even stalking to photograph his private life. I checked the time and grabbed my briefcase to leave. Before exiting, I reminded Lin Yu uneasily, "Our son has a follow-up hospital check this afternoon. My sister can't stay there all day as she works. Remember to bring him home." Lin Yu remained curled on the sofa with headphones on, not moving a muscle or turning her head. At 8 p.m., I dragged my leaden legs through the doorway. The house lay in tomb-like silence without a single light on. Only a faint glow flickered near the sofa. Approaching, I found Lin Yu. She placed the tablet on the coffee table, her eyes wide and unblinking as she stared excitedly at the screen, utterly immersed in some fervor. I reached out to flip the light switch, and the room was instantly flooded with brightness. Leaning closer, I saw her idol's photos and various frenzied fan support content on the screen. It was the fan-operated support super topic she'd created with her fan group. "Lin Yu." I could no longer suppress the fury in my heart, nearly roaring her name. "Where's our son?" Only then did Lin Yu slowly turn her head toward me, her gaze utterly bewildered, as if I'd asked a completely incomprehensible question. She countered, "What son?" Rage surged like tidal waves from the depths of my heart, crashing straight into my skull. I snatched her tablet and smashed it violently against the floor. The deafening thud pierced through the silent room. "I clearly told you before I left this morning that we were supposed to pick up our son from the hospital this afternoon. Did you even go?" Seeing me smash her tablet, Lin Yu finally seemed to snap out of her daze, fury instantly flooding her face. "Zhang Yu," she screamed, "you heartless bastard. Smashing my computer. Have you gone mad? If my idol's ranking drops, can you take responsibility?" She frantically crouched down and gathered the fallen tablet in her arms. Examining it carefully, her face etched with anxiety. "It's you who's gone mad," I roared, eyes blazing. "Neglecting your own flesh and blood. Does this family even mean anything to you?" Without hesitation, Lin Yu retorted, "It's just a child. How could he compare to my idol? Just have another one if we lose him. Besides, it's his own weak constitution. How is that my fault?" A loud slap cracked across her face. Lin Yu's eyes widened in disbelief, her gaze fixed on my hand. In the next moment, she launched at me like a feral beast, claws bared. "How dare you hit me, you bastard!" I showed no mercy, shoving her to the floor with full force before whirling around to storm out the door, roaring, "You better pray I find our son. If he's not at the hospital, Lin Yu, I'll make you pay. Through sheer luck, our son was completely unharmed. Ed, the nurses at the hospital were extremely conscientious. Seeing that no one had come to pick up the child for so long, they temporarily settled my son in the pediatric ward and cared for him attentively. After expressing profuse gratitude to the nurses, I carried my son home. After this turmoil, Lin Yu seemed to finally realize that I was genuinely enraged this time. She no longer spent all day glued to her phone, obsessively boosting data for her idol, nor stayed up burning the midnight oil to spam rankings or scream support. Sometimes, she would play simple parent-child games with our son, occasionally nuzzling her face affectionately against his little cheeks. Our son clearly became more willing to bond with her. Blood runs thicker than water. Perhaps this is the wonder of familial bonds. I had intended to keep giving Lin Yu the cold shoulder for a while longer, but an urgent project at the company suddenly required me to go on a business trip immediately. With time so pressing and no alternative available, I had no choice but to leave Lin Yu and our son alone at home, my heart filled with apprehension. During my business trip days, Lin Yu remained unexpectedly well-behaved. Not only that, she frequently initiated video calls to show me our lively, adorable son. In the video frames, Lin Yu held our son with a tender smile radiating across her face, creating an utterly heartwarming scene. However, I couldn't shake off a lingering sense of unease during every video call. Amidst the sweltering summer heat, our son remained thoroughly bundled up, only his small face visible beneath the layers. I couldn't help but ask. Lin Yu explained that our son had caught a chill while I was away, and she was taking extra precautions to protect him from cold drafts. Considering her concerns stemmed from maternal care, I didn't press further. After all, who doesn't yearn for a harmonious family and loving marriage? When my month-long business trip ended, my heart raced with anticipation as I hurried home. To surprise Lin Yu, I deliberately didn't inform her of my return in advance. Arriving at our doorstep, I found the door slightly ajar with a narrow gap. Despite the daytime, the interior felt unnaturally dim. The living room was empty, the silence tinged with an eerie quality. Confusion gripped me. Where was Lin Yu? Suddenly, ambiguous sounds drifted from our bedroom. Instinctively alert, I raised my eyes to the tightly shut door. Only then did I notice women's underwear and men's socks scattered across the floor, trailing from the bathroom all the way to the bedroom threshold. My heart sank as I immediately sensed something was wrong. My hands clenched involuntarily, suppressing rage while holding my breath as I approached the bedroom door. When I pressed down on the handle, I found it locked from the inside. This confirma. Tie-in made my lips tremble with fury. I roared, "Lin Yu, get the hell out here." The occupants clearly panicked at my shout, audible through chaotic scrambling sounds. No longer restraining my anger, I stepped back and kicked the door with all my strength. A thunderous crash echoed as the door collapsed inward. Lin Yu sat alone on the bed in sleepwear, face pale with panic. Our son lay beside her, eyes tightly closed as if in deep sleep. My gaze swept the room like fire. "Where is he?" I demanded harshly. A flash of panic crossed Lin Yu's face, but she quickly feigned composure. While smoothing her hair, she countered, "What he?" I ignored her feigned ignorance, simply staring coldly at her. Though fully dressed, I noticed her blouse buttons were misaligned. I approached the bed and coldly inspected the bedding. The air hung thick with an unmistakable foul odor, and Lin Yu's complexion grew increasingly pale. I yanked off the pillow. A used condom lay exposed. Lin Yu's face turned as pale as paper. "You shameless whore." Roaring with rage, I mustered all my strength and slapped her hard across the face. At that moment, the wardrobe door suddenly crashed down, revealing a completely naked man, now exposed before my eyes, locking gazes with me in mortified terror. Seeing me, the man frantically waved his hands, stammering incoherent attempts at explanation. Lin Yu's face was ashen, her eyes hollow as she stared at me. The raging fire of anger roared from my chest to my scalp, but I suddenly realized this man looked vaguely familiar. Upon closer inspection, he bore some resemblance to that idol of Lin Yu's who had been reviled across the entire internet. But wasn't that man still serving time in prison? In that instant, I remembered seeing in the news that he had a younger brother. My gaze involuntarily fell on our son, still sound asleep on the bed. They'd actually done this right beside the child. A wave of overwhelming absurdity and sorrow engulfed me, and in that moment, I nearly lost all reason. I grabbed my backpack and hurled it at Lin Yu with all my strength. "Lin Yu, have you no shame at all?" The backpack struck Lin Yu square in the face, sending her reeling backward with a pained, "Ow." At this moment, I saw the man frantically struggling into a piece of clothing, trying to bolt for the door. I immediately gave chase. "You bastard, stop right there." Just as I was about to grab the man, Lin Yu seemed to erupt with unprecedented strength, springing up from the floor at lightning speed to clutch my legs desperately, screaming hoarsely, "Run!" I could only watch helplessly as the man rushed out the door and vanished from sight. Damn it. I turned and slapped Lin Yu across the face with full force. You shameless woman. Only then did Lin Yu release me. Two bright red palm marks instantly bloomed across her originally pale cheeks, while her ears showed scraped skin oozing blood where my backpack had grazed it. Kneeling by the bed with red-rimmed eyes, she kept repeating, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Then suddenly she began shrieking like a madwoman. But he looks so much like my idol. I'd do anything for him. At this point, she seemed to suddenly remember something, extending her finger to point fiercely at me. Why did you come back early? Why didn't you tell me? You came to sabotage me on purpose, didn't you? I just want to chase after a shadow of my idol, and you have to stop me? Watching her irrational, aggressive demeanor, I felt a wave of desolation, even finding it somewhat absurd. I said coldly, chasing someone means sleeping with them? Oh wait, no, sleeping with his brother. You're really not picky at all. Seeing Lin Yu's instantly frozen expression, I couldn't bear another second of this nonsense. We're getting divorced. You leave with nothing. Leave with nothing? Lin Yu stared wide-eyed, looking at me as if I were some monster from a fairy tale, her face filled with utter disbelief. Zhang Yu, have you no conscience left? After all these years with you, you'd divorce me over a man? I had no desire to waste more words. Sidestepping her, I carefully picked up our sleeping son from the bed. Seeing this, Lin Yu lunged at me like a mad woman, her claws digging into my arm. Listen well, Zhang Yu. If you dare abandon me, I'll expose all your dirty laundry. Everyone will know you're a heartless traitor. With a violent shake, I sent her sprawling onto the floor. As she scrambled to attack again, I grabbed the fruit knife from the table and pointed its tip at her, my voice arctic. Stay back. Get out. Lin Yu stared at me with terrified eyes as if confronting a stranger, shrieking, Zhang Yu, you've gone mad. I curled my lips into a venomous smile. Exactly. I really want to stab you right now. Perhaps the ferocity in my eyes was too intimidating. Lin Yu had barely started to get up before she slumped back down in fright. I ignored her, clutching my son as I rushed out the door. He had been sleeping unnaturally quiet since we entered the house, neither crying nor fussing, filling me with growing dread. At the hospital, the examination results ignited volcanic fury in me. My son had been drugged with sleeping pills. Clearly, Lin Yu's doing to avoid interruptions while carrying on with her lover. She even dared to lay such a vicious hand on her own flesh and blood. What shattered me more was finding my son's body covered with bruises and wounds of varying sizes. Recalling the video calls with Lin Yu during my business trips, where she always kept the child bundled up tightly. Suddenly it all became clear. Lin Yu and that man must have been abusing my son. These two were utterly depraved and sadistic creatures. I would never dare entrust my son to Lin Yu again. As for that house, I rented a place outside and took care of my son alone, while simultaneously filing for divorce against Lin Yu. On a day off, I returned to the house I previously shared with Lin Yu to retrieve my belongings. Just as I reached the building entrance, I saw the brother of that idol who's been universally condemned online emerging from the stairwell. He seemed to recognize me upon sight, quickly lowered his head, pulled on his hat, and slinked away. I couldn't be bothered with him and went straight upstairs. When I pushed open the door, Lin Yu was lounging cross-legged on the living room sofa, leisurely applying a face mask. Seeing me enter, she first snorted coldly, her face brimming with disdain. Regretting it now? I knew it. With your pathetic self, who else would want you besides me? I pretended not to hear and walked directly into the bedroom to pack my clothes. Lin Yu grew anxious when she saw my indifference, rushing over to grab my arm. You're really going through with the divorce? How will we split the family assets? This house should rightfully be mine. I was well aware that Lin Yu didn't want a divorce out of any lingering affection for me, but rather out of fear that there would be no one to support her extravagant star-chasing lifestyle. This apartment was fully paid for with money I'd worked my fingers to the bone earning. How could I possibly leave it to her? I smiled coldly at her, my voice icy. Are you out of your mind? Lin Yu froze for a moment, stared at me for 2 full seconds, then suddenly raised her hand and slapped me across the face. Immediately afterward, she threw herself on the ground in a dramatic tantrum, wailing and screaming. You heartless bastard! Abandoning your wife and child. May you die a horrible death. In the past, when I hadn't yet resolved to divorce her, I'd always bitten my tongue. Now, every move she made only filled me with disgust. Without hesitation, I swung back and slapped her, then grabbed her by the hair and dragged her straight out the door. When Lin Yu realized I was physically removing her, she immediately began screaming at the top of her lungs, her cries echoing through the stairwell. Domestic violence. Murder. Come quick, everyone. Help. But in normal days, her late-night commotions at home due to celebrity chasing had already drawn neighbors' complaints. At this moment, all doors remained tightly shut in the corridor, with no one coming out to respond to her. Watching her scream in the hallway with disheveled hair and bare feet, she looked like nothing but a clown in a farce, both ridiculous and pitiful. Suddenly, I remembered the man I encountered downstairs. While Lin Yu was still raging outside, I quietly returned to the house, installing a hidden camera in an extremely concealed corner of the bedroom. Never could I imagine that Lin Yu would resort to such tactics to pressure me into stopping the divorce. My parents rushed from our hometown in panic upon hearing the news. In their memory, Lin Yu had always been that innocent girl next door, and though aware of her fanatical celebrity worship, they never expected her current state. Seeing me, my mother spoke with deep concern, her voice heavy with worry. Even though Yaya can be a bit headstrong at times, what marriage doesn't have its bumps and bruises? With mutual accommodation, you can always make it work. I opened my mouth, but ultimately didn't dare tell my mother about Lin Yu's affair or how she'd colluded with her lover to abuse our son. My mother's health had always been frail, and I feared she couldn't withstand such a blow. Around the same time, Lin Yu's parents also called. Uncle Lin and Aunt Lin were elders who'd watched me grow up. And despite Lin Yu's grave mistakes, I answered their call out of respect. Aunt Lin's gentle voice called my childhood nickname through the receiver. Xiao Yu. If Yaya has done anything wrong, let me apologize first on her behalf. Your uncle and I have arrived in City B. Let's have a family dinner in a couple of days to talk things through properly, and we'll make sure Yaya apologizes to you all. Is that all right? After a moment's consideration, I agreed, seeing this as an opportunity to lay everything out in the open. Lin Yu seemed to have long anticipated this meal. The moment I stepped into the private room, I saw her sitting beside Uncle Lin and Aunt Lin, her eyes brimming with arrogance, as if defiantly challenging me. She wore a vivid red dress, but on her exposed skin, faint traces of ambiguous marks lingered, nauseating to behold. I turned my head away, refusing to glance at her again. After my parents and I took our seats, the dinner officially began. Uncle Lin was the first to raise his glass, addressing me. Xiao Yu, if Yaya has done anything wrong, please be more tolerant of her. I hurriedly stood up to reciprocate, but Lin Yu interrupted. Don't bother with him. Now that he's successful, he wants to play the role of Chin Shimi asterisk and abandon his wife of humble origins. Her tone was sarcastic, dripping with mockery. Everyone knows, if it weren't for our family's support back then, he'd never have achieved what he has today. Now he wants to kick me aside. Not a chance. My face darkened instantly. Back when college entrance exams approached, my mother suddenly fell gravely ill, nearly draining our family savings. It was Uncle Lin who generously helped pay my university tuition. This kindness I've always kept in mind. After graduation, I worked diligently and repaid them the money immediately. Precisely because of this, I've endured Lin Yu's willful tantrums all these years. But this time, her actions truly crossed my bottom line. Moreover, her current remarks were clearly deliberate humiliation. Lin Yu chuckled coldly, then redirected her attack toward my mother. Auntie, may I call you that? After all, your son wants to divorce me. Mother looked uncomfortable, but Lin Yu continued as if noticing nothing. You said it yourself. Didn't Xiao Yu owe our family back then? Wanting a divorce now is just sheer ingratitude. Lin Yu, that's enough. I couldn't help but interrupt. Oh, did I say something wrong? Lin Yu immediately snapped back. Let me tell you, Zhang Yu, if it weren't for our childhood friendship, I wouldn't have looked twice at you. You took my family's money back then, and now you want a divorce? Don't you dare dream of it. Think you're so great now that you've made something of yourself. The private room fell deathly silent. Yeah, shut your mouth. Uncle Lin barked angrily. Mother, looking thoroughly embarrassed, tried to ease the tension. She reached out to hold my hand and attempted to take Lin Yu's hand as well. But Lin Yu brusquely shook her off. I pressed Mother's hand and said softly, Mom, don't bother. Then I raised my head and addressed everyone present. Dad, Mom, Uncle, Aunt. There's something I need to show you all. With these words, I pulled out my phone from my pocket and accessed the video captured by the hidden camera I'd previously installed in the bedroom. I raised the phone, opened the indecent footage, and pressed play. When I saw that man while packing my belongings that day, I knew Lin Yu would continue her involvement with him. Yet I never imagined they'd dare to act so brazenly in the home I'd worked so hard to purchase. It was utterly revolting. Instantly, the small private room was filled with the sounds of their passionate entanglement. On the screen, a man and woman writhed together. The woman was unmistakably Lin Yu, but the man wasn't me. Uncle, Aunt, Mom, Dad. I spoke calmly to the stunned group. Originally, I planned to part on good terms and bury this scandal through a quiet divorce. After all, no one wants their family shame exposed to the world. But since Lin Yu adamantly refused, you all deserve to know the truth. Mom, Dad, and Uncle and Aunt Lin's minds went completely blank. In their memories, although Lin Yu had always been a star-chasing enthusiast, she had previously been considered a sensible and reasonable girl. Who could have imagined she would do something so absurd? Especially for Mr. Lin, being a revered veteran teacher. He harbored profound disgust towards such morally unethical behaviors, viewing them as a disgrace to family traditions. His lips were trembling slightly at this moment, his hands clutching the edge of the table with white-knuckled force that drained the color from his knuckles. I turned off the video, plunging the private room back into a deathly silence, so profound one could hear a pin drop. Lin Yu's face instantly turned as pale as paper. She had never imagined I possessed this recording, nor anticipated I would play it directly in front of everyone. After all, she had been utterly convinced I would prioritize saving face over exposing the matter, which was precisely why she had acted with such audacity. Her trembling voice turned toward Uncle Lin, saturated with terror and nearly incoherent. Dad. Lin Yu had always feared her father since childhood, and at this critical juncture, that fear was magnified infinitely. Ungrateful wretch. Uncle Lin's face flushed crimson, his voice erupting from the deepest recesses of his chest. He grabbed the cane beside the table and, mustering all his strength, slammed it violently onto Lin Yu's back. Ah! With a piercing scream, Lin Yu collapsed to the ground, her body quivering uncontrollably. She struggled for a long time, but failed to rise. This strike revealed Uncle Lin's genuine fury. He had struck with ruthless intent. Dad. Beads of sweat dotted Lin Yu's forehead as she lifted her head, her eyes brimming with pleading as she gazed at her father. Uncle Lin's lips trembled, his fingers shaking as he pointed at her, his voice hoarse with rage, shameless. At this moment, Lin Yu noticed me standing nearby and instantly flew into a rage, her eyes widening like bronze bells. She struggled to rise, lunging toward me while shouting, "Was it you? You secretly recorded the video, didn't you?" Hearing her words, Uncle Lin raised his cane high again, roaring furiously. Then everything Xiao Yu said was true, wasn't it? As he prepared to strike again, Aunt Lin rushed forward and grabbed his arm. "Stop hitting her, old Lin." Lin Yu's eyes reddened with desperation as she shook her head wildly, pleading loudly. I didn't. This is a doctored video. You have to believe me." As she spoke, she writhed violently trying to stand up, but stumbled and fell again, knocking over several chairs before collapsing awkwardly on the floor. Even I couldn't help feeling pity for her now, though her self-deception was utterly laughable. "Lin Yu, can't you see how flimsy your excuses are?" Uncle Lin's face flushed crimson, his usually kind and gentle features now twisted with guilt. Trembling, he bent down and gave me a deep bow. "Xiao Yu, it's my fault for failing to raise my daughter properly. I owe you this apology." Seeing this, I quickly reached out to support Uncle Lin. When Lin Yu saw her father bowing to me, she completely lost control, screaming hysterically, "Don't apologize to him. He's framing me on purpose." My soft-hearted mother watched this scene with pained expression, casting me a questioning look. Lin Yu kept shrieking, "Gee," while tugging at Uncle Lin's sleeve. Uncle Lin suddenly slapped her across the face with a backhand blow, roaring, "Get out of here." The forceful slap sent Lin Yu staggering backward, nearly collapsing to the ground. Out of kindness, my mom hurried forward to steady her, but Lin Yu shoved her away, hurling vicious insults. "Don't touch me. Your whole family's the same, all disgusting, living off our money, and now framing me." She shot me a look of utter disgust as she spoke. "Mom," my mother nearly fell from the shove. I rushed over and steadied her, glaring furiously at Lin Yu. "Lin Yu, this has gone too far." "Ugh." Lin Yu spat venomously in my direction. Seeing her unrepentant defiance, I pulled a stack of photos from my pocket and slammed them on the table with a smack. Not just adultery. She and that man were abusing their son too. My parents recoiled at this vile revelation, their faces hardening with resolve as they united in their strong support for my divorce. Especially my mother, sitting in the living room, clutched our son tightly in her arms with tears streaming down her face. How could Lin Yu be so heartless? Lin Yu quieted down for a while, and I hadn't seen her during this period. She kept harassing me with texts and calls, but I blocked them all without hesitation. I heard she'd been confined at home by her parents, forbidden to go out. Mr. and Mrs. Lin probably felt guilty too. They raised no objections to my divorce lawsuit and custody battle for our son, though the divorce litigation process was cumbersome and time-consuming. During this period, Mr. Lin came to see me once. He perched stiffly on the sofa, face flushed with shame. Clearly resisting what he was about to say, he still gritted his teeth. "Xiao Yu, could you not divorce Lin Yu for now?" His face turned crimson, obviously having mustered immense courage to utter these words. When I remained silent, he continued, "I know Lin Yu wronged you. Actually, I can understand Uncle Lin's thoughts. These years, as he's aged, his health has significantly declined, and he can no longer support Lin Yu indefinitely. Meanwhile, Lin Yu has long grown accustomed to relying on me for sustenance at home, having not worked for years. He's worried that Lin Yu will have no one to care for her in the future, left alone and helpless. But my resolve is firm. I truly cannot agree to his request. I gazed resolutely at Uncle Lin and slowly shook my head. Seeing my response, Uncle Lin lowered his head and forced out two bitter, self-mocking laughs filled with anguish. Understood, understood. With that, he hunched slightly, stood up, and walked toward the door with heavy footsteps. I won't trouble you further. Not long after, the court verdict arrived. Lin Yu and I divorced. She left with no assets, and our son was placed under my custody. As for Lin Yu and that man, they were detained in accordance with the law for several days due to child abuse. My mother was indignant about this and muttered, "The punishment is too lenient. They got what they deserved." I simply smiled and patted her hand. For me, being completely free from Lin Yu was the best outcome. In the days that followed, my son and I kept each other company, embarking on a brand new life. Those turbulent events of the past gradually faded with time.